So for our next talk of the day, I want to bring on Jesse from Base for an interview and a fireside chat on what we think the future of a global economy looks like. So without further ado, please welcome Jesse on stage.
Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. No, it's not Friday. It's Wednesday.
Jesse, it's Wednesday.
3 more long days till Friday. Hey, everybody. Good to see you. This is my first talk that I've ever done with glasses, so you'll have to bear with me. The glare is a little bit different.
Well, this should be fun. So there's a lot of things I want to cover, and a lot of things are already on the theme of what you are actively talking about, which is how do we become on-chain. But the thing I want to start off with is some good news, which is just last Friday, Base turned 1. It's a massive milestone, and I'm kind of curious to understand how the last 12 months have been, and how do you reflect on that?
Yeah. I mean, last week was the 1-year anniversary of our announcement and launch of the testnet. So we launched the mainnet in August. So it's been about 6 months of mainnet, but it's pretty crazy that it's been a year since we were here last year for ETH Denver talking about the launch of Base. And then it's been about a year and 6 months since we actually started working on Base. And if I think about where we were a year and 6 months ago and where we are now, I don't think I could have imagined all of the progress we would have made in 18 months. I think the way I feel about today is that the industry has never been better positioned to take this kind of next upswing of adoption and next upswing of the world coming on chain. That's because we've built out a lot of the core infrastructure from low-cost L2s to better wallets to identity and social graphs. And with all of those pieces in place, I think we're really starting to see the rise of this next generation of applications. And I think the thing I just feel grateful about is that Base gets to be a part of it, and that we get to be building with all the incredible people in this room, all the incredible people who are building on Base around the world, and getting to help kind of shepherd in this next era of the on-chain revolution, which I think is going to be pretty freaking awesome.
So let's get into that. I mean, so the thing that's interesting to me is you actually really well summarized this thing in a blog post that talked about Base's new mission. And the mission you kind of talked about was the goal is to become a global on-chain economy that supports open innovation, creativity, and freedom. So what made you kind of converge on that statement, and how did you get to that mission, and what does it actually mean to be on-chain?
Yeah, when we started working on Base last year, I think the first thing that we really thought about was Base as a developer platform. It was like, okay, we're building block space. We're building a blockchain that offers block space. The primary consumer of that is developers. They build apps. Users then go and use those apps. But I think, we were launching the test now. We were kind of coming out and trying to figure out, like, how do we get our feet under us? And the thing that felt like a really clear North Star was we care most about developers. We want to make sure we have a really, really great developer product. And that was really our focus for 2023. It was, how do we make sure that when we bring Base into the world, we kind of incept a developer ecosystem, a developer platform that people actually want to build on. And I think that we're pretty successful in that. Obviously still very early, but there's a lot of people, there's thousands of people all over the world who are building on Base every day. And I think as we came into 2024, that kind of foundation, the foundation of, okay, we now have at least a somewhat reasonable developer platform, gave us the space to take a step back and be like, okay, where are we going? Like, yes, we are building developer tools, but really what is all this about? And I think one of the things that we kind of kept coming back to, because a lot of us have grown up in CoinBase for the last 7 years. And, I joined CoinBase at the beginning of 2017 as an engineer, kind of spent 5 years building all the consumer products, was the CoinBase mission. And the CoinBase mission is to increase economic freedom globally. That's it. Increase economic freedom. And the idea is basically, if we increase economic freedom, which is things like, surety for the assets that you hold, freedom to transact, freedom to trust the financial systems that you depend on. If we increase economic freedom, what you see from research is basically everything else gets better too. It's like you have longer lives, you have happier lives, you have better businesses, you have people basically working together because they're building on a platform that they can trust and that supports them and puts them on a level playing field. And so we kind of thought about, okay, we've built this developer platform. We have a strong foundation there. We come from these roots of thinking about increasing economic freedom and figuring out how do we actually do that. What does this mean for what is Base's role in achieving that goal of increasing economic freedom, leveraging this developer platform that we built. And I think what that kind of brought us to is this conception of Base as an economy. And we're not the only people who have an economy. And one of the things I've actually done recently is analogize Base to other things. And the two ones I really like analogizing to are the United States and the Apple App Store. Both of those are economies. The United States, you have
pretty big economies too.
Pretty big economies, right? In the United States, you have the kind of governance platform that people build on. Then you have this ecosystem of apps that people depend on to run their businesses or to do things. And then you have actual capital markets that sit at the top that are governed by the United States. And there's a lot of great things about that market. It's an economy. It's worked really well. There's also a lot of not so great things. Like if you're not a U.S. citizen, you don't have nearly the same access to it. And so depending on where you're born, you might not be able to participate in that economy. Same thing with the App Store, right? If you're in the iOS App Store, you have a developer platform, it sits at the bottom, then you have this ecosystem of apps, and then you have a capital market with all of this revenue that's flowing through there. And Apple, in this case, has decided, hey, we're going to tax all the revenue at 30%. We're also going to make it so if you don't have an iPhone, because you don't have enough money to have an iPhone, you can't access any of the apps. You can't participate. And I think the thing that we saw with Base is, wow, there's actually an opportunity for us to create an economy that's better than both of those economies. Because we can have a developer platform that's fundamentally open, that anyone anywhere in the world can build on, regardless of where you're born, regardless of where you live, regardless of who you are. If you have an internet connection, you can build on Base. We can have an app ecosystem that is a neutral level playing field, where any app is accessible to anyone. You don't have to have an iPhone. You don't have to be a United States citizen. You can just participate. And then we can have a capital market that is decentrally governed using all of this incredible governance infrastructure that's starting to be built on chain that can be free and support that economic freedom that I think we're striving towards. And so that conception of Base as an economy, and an economy that we believe can increase innovation, can increase creativity, and then most importantly, can increase freedom, that was kind of this insight that I think we had at the end of last year that has brought us into this year and really anchored us on why we're doing what we're doing.
That was amazing. All those things are actual active things that everybody can relate to because they've experienced either side of it. And I think the nuance here is that the interoperability on the U.S. government or the App Store is still the pressing issue that everybody wishes for. But we've also seen, as somebody who's been in the space for also such a long time, we've also seen the definition of on-chain differ and evolve over time. So what does it actually mean for you to be on-chain? Are we talking about anything must be on-chain as a auditable thing, and I get to see everybody's balances, I get to see everything that's literally going on and trace everything? What's the differentiation on what should and shouldn't be on-chain?
Yeah, if you've seen me on the internet, you've probably gotten sick of me saying on-chain because it's a thing we've been hammering on, and there's a reason we've been hammering on it, and that's because as we have actually done a lot of research on the Base team and at CoinBase, what we found is that when you use on-chain, it is much better received by both existing builders and net new people because they can very quickly analogize it to online, and that is a mental model that people understand. And there is significantly less stigma for on-chain versus Web3 or blockchain or crypto. And so I actually had a conversation with a builder this morning, and they were like, hey, do you have any feedback? And I said, yes, I have one piece of feedback. Change your website. Stop saying Web3. Start saying on-chain. And what you will get is you will get more high-quality builders, and you will have a higher hit rate of conversion for people who don't understand what crypto is. That's we've researched it. That's the facts. So if you're writing Web3, stop. Write on-chain. You will land better with your audiences. But I think when we talk about on-chain, the way I've kind of ended up defining it for myself, because I do think that there's questions from people of does this mean everything needs to be on a blockchain? And I think the reality is where our infrastructure is today, that's not possible from a cost perspective. And we're still really figuring out what the contours are of this architecture that's shaping up. What's going to be on L1, what's going to be on L2s like Base, what's going to be on L3s, which I basically think about as on-chain integrated servers that anyone can run, kind of like their own data center. We don't really know what that's going to look like. And so how I've really started thinking about on-chain is something is on-chain if it is anchored to the kind of money and identity that is anchored on-chain on L1 or L2. And so if, for instance...
But not that to a user?
Sorry?
So as you said, it's anchored to L1 and L2, but not specifically tied to a person?
Anchored to a user's identity and money from L1 or L2. And I think Farcaster is a really great example of this. For those who maybe don't know, Farcaster is a social network, an on-chain social network. Lots of really cool things happening there right now, highly worth checking out. The way their work is their identity registry is on Optimism mainnet. And that's kind of where you register your Farcaster ID. That's where you link additional addresses to your ID so people can know who you are across a bunch of different places. But then they actually have another kind of network layer called hubs, which I think about basically as an L3 that's sitting on top of L2, where all of the actual cast data or tweet data is. And in that case, what they're doing is they're basically saying, hey, we're going to leverage the identity infrastructure of blockchain, of Ethereum, of Optimism mainnet, and these addresses that people have to anchor. We're going to use the payments infrastructure to do payments, but we're going to have these kind of like components that flow off it that enable people to operate at a much larger scale that actually supports consumer apps. And so I would definitely consider Farcaster on-chain. I would also consider things that are, we're going to publish literally every transaction on-chain, into a block on-chain as well. But I think having some flexibility and really thinking about this more as a kind of like mentality, mindset, and
some proof of action happening on-chain so that there is guarantees.
Just like when businesses went online, when you first bought your books on Amazon, the books didn't live online. The books were in a warehouse, but you bought it online. The identity, the payment happened online. And what's happening now is the identity and payments happening on chain. And then sometimes the other things are offline, sometimes the other things are online, but that kind of really foundational component of identity and payments is moving onto this new infrastructure that is fundamentally accessible to everyone because it's a global on-chain economy.
And you don't need permission to deploy, which is exactly the best part.
Anyone anywhere in the world can participate.
I think the cool thing to me about all this thing is that it is a function of time too. Like we've spent the last 5 years getting to the scalability base kind of thresholds to be like, hey, this is actually finally possible. And obviously there's a lot of room for improvement here. But I want to kind of understand, how do you think about the cost of being on chain as Base, as CoinBase, as advice to developers, as I think about this thing? What should be considered? What can we expect? Obviously, you've contributed to a lot of these scaling efforts too. So let's kind of like merge all that in, and let's kind of talk about the cost of being on chain and thinking around it.
When we started working, not on Base specifically, but kind of like the concept of bringing Coinbase on chain about 2.5 years ago, I think the first thing we identified was that we wanted to build on EVM, we wanted to build on Ethereum, we wanted to build on L2, but L2 was still too expensive. If you look back then, the average transaction was in the dollars on L2, maybe high, cents. Today, average transaction something like 20 to 40 cents. And for certain things, that's fine. Like if you're sending USDC, it's actually way better than Ethereum, but it's still pretty pricey.
On day to day.
And it's not something that you can do hundreds of times a day. And so I think our belief continues to be that in order to kind of support the consumer scale that we want to, we need to get transaction fees sub-cent. Like that's our North Star. It's like my team wakes up every day. And it's like, how do we get transaction fees sub-cent while preserving the decentralized, secure, scalable, reliable characteristics of Ethereum at layer 2? And I think that, with EIP 4844 coming up on March 13th, which Base will be day one ready for, thanks to 2.5 years of hard work and collaboration with Optimism Collective and other Ethereum core developers, I think we're going to get another kind of 2 to 5x reduction. I think there's a chance that we're actually going to get sub-cent for a little while there as the kind of
look at the fee economy thresholds, bandwidth,
But I think that this is going to be the next inflection point. We kind of had an inflection point over last year where L2 emerged, we got 10x cheaper, and a lot of new use cases started to come up. Next, we're going to have 4844, which is going to come down again. We're going to see more use cases. And then I think we're actually going to see the maturation of L3s, which, like I said earlier, is kind of like a blockchain connected server where you can do anything at a massive scale. But again, you can still use those identity and payments primitives. You can still access the identity that a user has. You can still use the USDC or DGen or whatever other token lives on the L2, but you can operate at massive scale. I think that's going to drive the cost down even further. So you're talking, hundredths of a cent to thousands of a cent, which is going to open up even more of the aperture of what's possible.
So let's try to get a better intuition for these L3s. So L1 is Ethereum, And then we have L2 as optimism.
Yeah.
We have L3 as base.
Not quite.
Not quite.
So I think about this as L1 is Ethereum. So that is, it's pure technical infrastructure. Its job is to provide the ability to run EVM compute in a way that can be protected from nation states and have ultimate maximal trust. Optimism originally launched as an L2. OP mainnet is an L2. It runs on top of Ethereum. I actually think about Optimism as we talk about it today almost as an L1.5. What Optimism is gradually evolving into is a governance system that will govern many L2s, including Base, including OP mainnet, including Zora, including Mode, including a bunch of these other pieces of infrastructure. And Optimism is basically going to live as a connection of smart contracts that exist on L1 that bring them together, create a shared security model, shared bridging model,
Super chain of sorts.
Super chain of sorts. And that's going to basically, I think, lay the foundation for what I expect to emerge as somewhere between 5 to 50 L2s that will make up L2. And the mental model I have for this is actually kind of anchored to the original Ethereum scaling vision, which is when you look at pre-rollup centric scaling of Ethereum, it was we're going to have 64 shards. I think that we're going to end up in about the same place with L2s, where you're going to have somewhere between 5 and 64 shards that are basically going to be these big L2s that have major economies driven through them, that have governance, that are cultural, that have, maybe verticals or maybe geographies that they're really anchored to. And I think Base is going to be the center of that economy. And that's really what we're working towards. That's L2. I think that the really cool thing about L2 is it's going to be able to support global scale. We're going to be able to have billions of people who do some amount of transacting on L2, but there's still lots of things that you can't support at that layer. And so I think a great example of this for me has actually been Farcaster, where I don't know if folks have used Farcaster, but they now have a warps button where you can click and it gives 10 warps. And one warp is 1 cent. Basically, that's the mental model. There's also something called degen on there where you can reply 500 degen and that gives like 5 cents of degen, which is a token on Base. You can't do a warp click or a degen tip that costs 5 cents if the network fee is even going to be 1 cent, because then you're paying one transaction. Then you're paying 20% of the transaction fee. And so what you can instead do is you can stand up an L3, and then you can really easily in one click let users deposit their degen or their USDC into that L3. And then the fees on that L3 will be 1/100th of a cent or 1,000th of a cent. And users can withdraw at any time as well. And so what that's doing is it's basically pulling in that sense of identity and those payments pieces and saying, we're going to create a contained execution environment that we can really run at kind of max capacity to get the sort of scale we need in order to do tons and tons of transactions. And so I think that will be really useful for tipping. I think that will be really useful for gaming, where you want to put some money into a game and then play that game and then deposit, withdraw the money whenever you're ready. And I think in general, the way to think about that is it's going to be like running a server. It's going to be as easy as running an EC2 instance on AWS, but instead of that EC2 instance being totally disconnected from the on-chain economy, you're going to be able to stand up an on-chain L3 EC2 instance, and it will immediately have access to the entire L2 economy that's connected to, as well as all of the user identity infrastructure that comes with that.
No, that's great. You partially answered the question I was going to follow up with, which is what other properties does that L3 have in this definition? Because you now have introduced another sort of level of talking to other L3s, because not everything can be entirely self-contained. So does that mean sort of...
I think this is what we're figuring out right now, and I wish I had the answer, but I don't. I will say that I expect there's going to be massive experimentation at the L3 layer. And so, we are obviously really excited about people building OP stack L3s on Base, and we're a core contributor to the OP stack. We're writing code, shipping. We're actually about to ship the 4844 update. That's all led by the Base core team. We did the governance proposal. We're running the whole release process. Really incredible example of decentralization. And I think there's going to be a ton of OP stack L3s. But I also think there's going to be Solana VM L3s on Base. There's going to be Move VM L3s on Base. There's going to be Parallel EVM L3s on Base. There are going to be Orbit L3s on Base.
That's the best form of experimentation.
It's going to be all of this incredible experimentation. And over time, we're going to figure out, okay, how do we drive more interoperability between these things? But I also think a lot of these things aren't going to need as much interoperability because they're going to be a game.
The final state matters as well. Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, I am super, super bullish on the ability for developers to figure it out. because that's what we've been doing for the last 5 years, 10 years. I mean, I've been now doing this for 13 years. So it's like, we just have to keep iterating on these pieces of infrastructure, and they will gradually come together to create this on-chain economy.
Amazing. So kind of coming back to the three things that you said you need obviously a great developer experience, you need an app ecosystem and capital markets. What role do you think Base plays in all three of these versus kind of having this be a platform and everybody else kind of gets to decide how they want to contribute versus kind of bootstrapping it and also maintaining it?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. It's I think particularly pertinent for Base because Base was incubated inside of CoinBase. There's both an opportunity, which is leveraging Coinbase distribution, leveraging Coinbase apps to fulfill a bunch of those layers of the stack, right? Like Coinbase can build developer tools to make it a great developer platform, and Coinbase can build apps to make it a great app ecosystem, and Coinbase could build capital markets to make it a great capital market. And there's a vision of Base where it's like all Coinbase. And there's opportunity there, but I also think there's massive risk because when I think about building an on-chain global economy that increases innovation, creativity, and freedom, if that's just one company, you don't have a global on-chain economy.
Or a lot of freedom.
Or freedom, right? Like then you have the App Store. And so I think one of the things that we are working really, really hard to do on Base is leverage the Coinbase strength and help Coinbase come on chain, but also make sure that we don't do that to a fault, where we basically have a chilling effect or a monopoly effect that crowds everyone else out. And so a few examples of this, like on the developer tools, Coinbase is building developer tools on Base, right? We have Coinbase Pay that lets people on-ramp onto Base. But Base is also working with MoonPay and Ramp and Transact and every other on-ramp to make sure that Base has the best on-ramps in the world. Coinbase has a wallet, Coinbase Wallet. We love Coinbase Wallet. I also love Rainbow. I'm a Rainbow user every day. I'm a Dawn user every day. It's my default Safari browser app. Even dabble with MetaMask sometimes. And I think we're going to see more and more applications. And then on the capital market side, I think this is a place where we're being particularly sensitive. It's such I think a risk that it would be overly controlled, both from a regulatory perspective, but also from a freedom perspective. And so we, I think, up to this point, have said, hey, we're going to do everything we can to make Base an entirely neutral capital market. And sometimes people have been a little surprised.
Implying anybody can do whatever they want, or
implying that anyone can do whatever they want. Like sometimes people, they were like, what did you think about Bald launching, meme coin? Like, why didn't you guys shut that down? It's like, that was the best test for us. And in many ways, I actually think it was the best thing that could have happened to Base because before anyone even had the chance to really think, there was a proof point on Base of like, we're not going to mess with this stuff. We're going to let people create. We're going to let people do crazy things sometimes, make mistakes, learn, and that's going to be the thing that creates this creativity, that creates this economy, and that's going to be what allows us to have it be free. And so I think, particularly on the capital markets, we've really, really focused on creating that neutrality, letting organic capital markets form, and then gradually figuring out how do we nurture them by, selectively saying, hey, let's lean in here, let's amplify these things, let's help drive more, resources, capital into the markets.
Amazing. Well, I do kind of want to jump in a little bit deeper here. What is the relationship with Coinbase and Base? And like, obviously, it was incubated through Coinbase, but a year and a half has passed. How do you kind of think about it now versus kind of where do you think it's going? And what role do you see Coinbase playing in effectively the freedom that you have to make decisions as Base versus kind of what may or may not be complementary to Coinbase?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually about to hit 7 years at Coinbase on March 13th.
Yes.
Thanks. I started a startup before I joined Coinbase. That business didn't work. Went through an acqui-hire process. My whole team actually sold to Twilio because they wanted to keep working on two-factor authentication, which we were working on. But I was so excited about crypto because we've been working with crypto companies. So I was like, I'm not going to Twilio. I want to go to Coinbase. And I kind of carved out my offer, joined Coinbase, and then would go on to recruit back my whole team who joined over the next few years. But for the first 5 years, I led all of the consumer products at Coinbase. So Coinbase Pro, Coinbase Wallet, Coinbase. We built those teams to a few hundred people. I led all the engineering for them. And then in middle of 2021, I basically said, hey, I loved that. That was awesome. But I'm both not ready to just be a big manager of managers of managers of managers. Like I want to be at the in the weeds with the builders.
The U.S. government.
Exactly. And I wanted to get closer to the metal of what was happening in crypto and really push forward the ecosystem from an infrastructure perspective. And so started working on this concept of bringing Coinbase on chain. We went through a bunch of different ideas. All of them failed. They actually shut down my team. And then kind of out of the ashes of that, we were like, what blocked us from actually doing all this? And we were like, well, we don't have a platform to build on. And that thing was a kind of like overnight idea that we had. We shipped an internal testnet called BaseNet, and then we were off to the races. And the beginning of Coinbase was incubated inside of Coinbase. And it was me and two other people who I've been working with for a long time, one who literally joined a month before me, and we've been working with together for 7 years. And then we gradually kind of built the team up. Now it's about 25 people. And the core team is still employed by Coinbase. We are in our own little area. I operate as a kind of CEO, founder of Base, have basically full independence. But we are kind of in this interim stage where we started out much more connected to Coinbase. We've now transitioned into a more independent role, but still within the broader Coinbase umbrella. And then over the next few years, what we're working to figure out is how do we continue to decentralize further? So that's the team, that's kind of the decision making, and how we're executing from a core team perspective. Now, from a technology perspective, one of the things that was really, really critical, both from an ethos perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective, was that we actually set up the Base network such that it wasn't just Coinbase, and that Coinbase was not a single actor that could make decisions about the network. And so when we launched Base Mainnet, one of the prerequisites was that we ensure that that was not the case.
And this is commenting on sequencing transactions, or?
This is not commenting on sequencing. It's actually commenting on the contracts that control the L2 on the L1 that basically define who can sequence, define the block derivation. And so could rotate out the sequencer, could rotate out challenger, could rotate out any of those roles, or it could change fundamental things about the blockchain. And the way that's governed today is we actually have a 2 of 2, which then goes into 2 much larger multi-sigs, one managed by the Optimism team, foundation, and then one managed by the Base team. And what that means is it means that Base and Coinbase cannot unilaterally make any decisions. Anything needs to go through Optimism and the Optimism Foundation, and anything needs to adhere to this thing called the Law of Chains, which is an open neutrality framework that we spent 9 months drafting with the Optimism Foundation to kind of create a framework for what I think about as basically on-chain federalism, where Optimism is operating as a federal government that taxes us a little bit and then gives us funding, gives us infrastructure, gives us security, and then Base is operating as a state government. I generally analogize us to California. That's where I'm from. That's kind of what our vibes feel the most like, where we can have our own governance, we can set our own rules as long as we continue to be a good member of the union. And so that structure has basically made it so we can ensure that Base remains open and permissionless because we have that backstop. And the 2 of 2 is the first step. The next step is we're actually going to transition those controls to a security council that Optimism just built and moving all the way towards Optimism governance while preserving our sovereignty to have our own governance systems, to maintain our own economic rights within that broader context. So that's the actual network. It is a step further decentralized already. And then I'd say the third thing is the Base ecosystem. And this is something I've started talking about more and more. But one of the things that I have been most encouraged by in the last 6 months is that there have been a number of organic cultural movements that have started to emerge in Base and build influence, clout, and governance rights. And so the 3 ones that I'm most excited about right now, one is called Base Management, which is kind of building a whole army of interns who are like building culture on Base, trying to onboard other interns, basically trying to be this onboarding funnel for people to come into Base and kind of create the economy that we have there. That's totally independent of Base. It's a DAO. It uses Nouns Builder, started by this guy, Leighton Cusack, who's incredible, and Light. Both of them are real like visionaries. The second is something called Yellow Collective, which is a collective that is supporting artists on Base, also a Nouns Builder DAO. And they are, kind of basically building a whole artist community. And then the third one is something called Base God, which is basically building a religion on Base. And when I look at all of those, they're very different. One is like kind of taking more corporate.
It's slightly more different than the others.
Somewhat. One is religious, one is, artistic. But when I look at the history of society,
cultural revolution,
right? If you look at what has historically been, the biggest cultural movements in the off-chain world, it is sports and religion. And then there have been cultural art movements, there have been cultural corporate movements. And I think one of the things that I am increasingly convinced is that because Base does not yet have an explicit top-down governance infrastructure with a token, which I think in many ways can end up becoming monolithic, what we are seeing emerge is actually one of the first bottoms-up organic governance kind of
subcultures
emerge. And I think one of the things that we're going to be able to do is we're actually going to be able to bootstrap off of those organic subcultures to give them more governance rights. So you can imagine saying, hey, let's add Base management to the Security Council. Let's
add different counties in that analogy.
Exactly. And so that for me, when we were building Base, the thing that I was most scared of was no one was going to show up. Like, man, let me tell you, I had more anxiety, heartburn in last year that no one was going to show up than any time in my entire life. But I think what we've seen is to the contrary, that there are actually literally thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people all over the world who see this vision of building a global on-chain economy that increases creativity, freedom, and innovation, and rallying towards it, and are saying, hey, not only do we want to be a part of it, we want to build it. Because we're builders, we're base builders who have this shared mentality of building for the long term, doing things right, putting the team in front of the individual, and making sure that when we are building this thing, we're making it last for what I expect to be generations, literally hundreds of years.
That was awesome. Well, maybe we'll end on this note by a simple, obvious question. What advice do you have for builders building on Base?
Build something. That's the only thing. People often ask me, like, how can I get involved? Can you get on a call? Like, what can I do? And the thing I say to them is find something that you're interested in and build it. Like, I don't want to do calls. I'll do a call maybe if you build something cool. But I think the coolest thing you could do is just take an idea that you have and put it on chain. And that can be anything. It can be a new app that you write code for. It can be a piece of art that you publish as
a tutorial you follow just to see how to deploy.
Tutorial that you follow. It can be a meme that you create. Like literally today, there are tools for anyone to create anything on chain. And so all that requires is you taking initiative, say, I'm going to be a builder and I'm going to build on Base. And if you raise your hand and you want to be a builder, we are 1,000,000,000% here to help you. You can post in the /base channel on Farcaster, which is the largest channel on Farcaster, has 130,000 followers. You'll get a ton of distribution there, and there'll be a ton of people who want to help you. You can join our builder Telegram group, which I can add you to. You can DM me on Twitter or Farcaster if you want to. You can join our Discord, where it's even more hands-on. There's a ton of ways for you to get involved, but the best way to get involved is by building.
Awesome. Jesse, thank you so much for that amazing conversation.
Yeah, thanks y'all for having me and
build on Base.
Build with all of you. Kartik, thanks as always. I love Pragma.
Thanks.